Hello, everyone. This is Howard Gearhauser. On the line, you have my dad, Dr. G. In today's video, we are going to go through an advanced health technique called cold adaptation. It's also referred to as cold exposure or cold therapy or cold thermogenesis. But essentially, the idea of getting your body really, really cold and experiencing the health benefits of doing that. Another popular thing that a lot of people are doing, especially in the San Diego, LA area where I am, is cryotherapy. So that's where you go into the cold chambers. So we'll touch on that a little bit too. But what we want to discuss are the risks and benefits of cold therapy and what you should be looking out for, how you can do this safely if this is something that you want to incorporate into your life. So Dad, why don't we start with just a little background on cold thermogenesis? What is it? Why is it important?
All right. Well, I think one of the most important considerations is thinking about ancient humans and nature. So I often do that. The planet right now is a lot warmer than it's been recently. So we've had some ice ages in our past, and humans had to adapt to that cold weather when an ice age occurs. So we have an ability to adapt to the cold. When we lived out in nature as hunter-gatherers, we didn't have heated houses, or we didn't have houses at all. We might not have had much in the way of clothing. And so today, in contrast, we're constantly in houses. A lot of times houses are kept at 70 degrees. Okay, it's winter now, so this is a good time to talk about it. In winter, you should be theoretically exposed to lower temperatures so that you adapt. Well, what's wrong with being comfortable at 70 degrees? Well, we'll explain some of the science that looks at maybe it's not so good to be comfortable at 70 degrees 24/7. Then the other thing, we heat our cars, if we're traveling. Think of an ancient human traveling, walking, wading rivers and streams, getting wet, and it's winter. You're going to get very cold repeatedly as a hunter-gatherer. We get in our car, we get in our Escalade with heated seats and heated steering wheel or whatever. We wear a thick down coat or some other heavy coat, and then we rush out of the cold weather to get in the heated building. So we really are avoiding cold exposure, but our ancestors, through being exposed to nature, were exposed to a lot of cold. And then the periodic ice ages that have occurred in recent history, geologic history, we were exposed to sometimes severe cold. So all mammals really have cold adaptation genes in them, and that's because 60 million years ago, an asteroid hit the planet that created an ice age. That wiped out the dinosaurs, but what survived and then later became the dominant animal species on the planet? Mammals. So we can survive the cold, but our modern world, we're not exposed to the cold. So what really cold thermogenesis is, or cold adaptation protocols or whatever, is just exposing yourself to some cold. Now, it could be severe cold, like the chambers Howie was talking about, where you go for 3 minutes into 200 degrees below zero or something with the liquid nitrogen, or just turn down the thermostat in your house, say turn it down from 70 to 65. It could be something as simple as that. Now, believe it or not, there's been research that shows that something as simple as that, turning the thermostat from 70 to 65, helps you lose weight. They've done a study where they had a group of people, kept it at 70, and another group of people, they put it at 65. Nothing else changed. Nothing else was different in the experiment. They lost weight. So that's one of the big benefits in our modern world, where obesity and overweight are so common. In fact, obesity, if you combine obesity and overweight, it's the new normal in the United States and a lot of other countries.
So in terms of weight loss as it relates to cold exposure, what's the mechanism that's going on that's causing the weight loss? Is there some sort of stimulation that happens by getting cold? Could you just explain that a little bit more?
Oh, yes. So when, our body is maintained at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or around there, that's a normal body temperature. And so let's say we're in a house at 70 degrees all the time, our body has to generate a certain amount of heat to maintain the 98.6. But if you turn the thermostat down to 65, then there is that 5 degrees extra energy that your body has to produce to stay at the proper temperature. Now, you could say, well, if I turn my thermostat down to 65, I'll just, because I'm burning more energy, I'll just be stimulated to eat more. And so I won't lose any weight because I'll just compensate for that lower temperature by eating more. But that doesn't tend to happen. And studies have shown that cold exposure lowers a hormone that makes us hungry, and that's called ghrelin. So ghrelin is lowered by cold exposure, which might be counterintuitive. You might think, well, in nature, if you're cold, you should want to eat more. But that's what happens. And that's why people tend to lose weight when they lower their thermostat. Now, when you get into more intense cold exposure, like when you get your skin temperature down to around 55 degrees Fahrenheit, so 55 degrees Fahrenheit, you stimulate the sympathetic nervous system. And the stimulus of the sympathetic nervous system, there's adrenaline and noradrenaline, or it's now they call it epinephrine. Epinephrine and norepinephrine. Norepinephrine goes way up with cold exposure, so that's been seen in experiments. And this stimulus of norepinephrine stimulates a mechanism stimulating what are called beta-adrenergic receptors in our tissues. And what this does is it causes us to develop heat engines. So what these heat engines are fat that form inside the fat cell a colony of mitochondria. So normally we have white fat and brown fat. So white fat doesn't have any mitochondria. Brown fat does have mitochondria. Adults don't have brown fat. Kids do, babies do especially. But especially in our modern world where we're always comfortable, we lose our brown fat. We completely lose it. But studies show, and this is found through PET scans, it'd be a hard thing to figure out, but they've exposed people to cold like an hour a day or something, and a month later, usually it occurs around the collarbone here, and it also occurs on the buffalo hump. Yeah, I mean, you don't get big buffalo hump or a lot of fat around your collarbone, but if you look at the scans, it's inside and underneath the collarbone. This area starts to develop brown fat if we're getting the cold exposure. So for an adult, obese people typically don't have brown fat. Obese person that wants to lose weight can start cold exposure, can start developing brown fat. What does brown fat do? It makes heat. So think of a day when you're out skiing, and it's late in the day and you fell in the powder and powder went down your coat, and and you're like frozen, your fingertips are frozen, and you want to warm up. And so, but your skin gets down to 55 degrees. So that skin down to 55 degrees, well, stimulate the sympathetic fight or flight nervous system, causes a release of norepinephrine, will start the development of brown fat. But if you don't have brown fat, what you're going to do as you're headed to the lodge, you're going to start shivering. Okay? So shivering is another mechanism we have. Now, shivering is the muscle contracting but not doing anything, like isometric contraction over and over and over, and that can generate heat as well. So we have two ways to generate heat. One is directly from the mitochondria making heat. So the mitochondria makes heat because of a protein in the mitochondria on the inner mitochondrial membrane called uncoupling protein 1. So uncoupling protein 1, instead of our mitochondria making energy that we would use, say, for a muscle contraction, it makes heat directly in the form of ultraviolet, or not ultraviolet, infrared light. So we make heat. We have a little sauna inside of us, and we make heat, and that heats it up. But if we don't have the brown fat, then we shiver. And shivering's good too. It's just that if you don't have the brown fat, then you have to shiver. If you have brown fat, that will kick in first, and hopefully it's enough to do the job.
So you mentioned that the cold stimulates the fight or flight response, which maybe some of our listeners are thinking, well, isn't that the stress response? And isn't that something that we're trying to turn off, not get activated? So what's the difference between cold stimulating the fight or flight versus being stressed out like day to day?
Well, this is a very strong stimulus to the fight or flight. So this can be a problem for people that are burnt out. So if you're burnt out, and you may have heard of a term called adrenal fatigue, where your adrenal glands just can't mobilize. They're like, they're shot, your adrenal glands are shot. Then this cold therapy is probably not something you want to really push at that time. So yes, the fight or flight is part of a balanced nervous system. So it's not bad to have fight or flight. I mean, if you go and do some intervals, you go, I want to do some high intensity exercise, and you do some sprints, you're doing fight or flight. So fight or flight is good. It's just that if we're getting the fight or flight from mental images in our head, like, oh my God, tomorrow is going to be the worst day at work, and yesterday I'm still pissed off about what he did to me. If we're thinking that, the chronic stress where the fight or flight never turns off, but this is just a brief cold exposure. It's like working out your muscles. If you work them out constantly, you'd tear them. But if you work them out and then take a day off to recover, you make the system stronger. And so it's the same thing with the fight or flight nervous system. We're stressing it, but that brings us back to baby steps. That's why you want to do this gradually. Now, I'm 10 years into this, so I'm an expert as far as me, how I've done it and adapted through the years to doing cold therapy. So I've been doing it. I've stuck with it for 10 years. I do it mainly in the winter. I don't do it much in the summer when it's not as a natural thing to be cold in the summertime, especially where I live in Arizona. So in Arizona, it's kind of tough. You got to buy ice. It's a hassle. I don't want to pay for a cryotherapy, and the cryotherapy is so brief. There are studies though showing benefits from the cryotherapy chambers, but I think more prolonged cold exposure is more optimal. And I do immersion in water. And that's because immersion in water conducts the cold 27 times more efficiently than air. So yes, going out for an hour with your shirt off in the wintertime or a thin shirt exposed, that's good. But it's not the same as going into 55-degree water and staying there, for say 10 minutes or 20 minutes. What I typically do is I push it a little more in the late fall. I start doing it maybe every other day. And then once I feel I'm really cold adapted, and I know that by how I don't need to wear coats anymore. And I enjoy a cool morning, a cool, crisp morning, or I enjoy rolling down the window on my pickup truck, when it's 29 degrees. That's cold for Arizona. I know some of you are going, that's not cold. I wear a bikini when it's 29 degrees. And there's some people that aren't going to do this. I realize there's a lot of you out there that no matter what I say, they won't do it. But if you try just the simple things, and what we'll discuss right at the end, exactly what I would say is a good way to start. If you just try it, you might find, like me, you become someone that's been doing it for 10 years and feel there's multiple benefits. And the science shows us there's a lot of potential. Now, the science, it isn't concrete. It isn't like they've done dozens of studies on each of these factors. They haven't. Usually it's one study. Usually it's animal studies, and then they do a very small human study. So there's not big trials looking at this stuff. No one's out there to pay for big trials on something that's totally free if you live in a cold environment. If you live in a hot environment, ice costs money. It's not the most environmentally friendly thing to do to, have them making a bunch of ice for you in the summertime.
But as you mentioned before, this is something that you should focus on more when it's a colder climate, not necessarily when it's super hot. That's the way humans lived. When you're living out in nature, you're not going to be getting super cold during the summer in Southern California or Arizona, like where my dad is. So over Thanksgiving, this in 2019, it's 2020 now, we did some cold immersion in Sabino Canyon Creek in Tucson, Arizona. And that water was coming from the snow melt. So it was pretty darn cold. And from my experience, like the first couple minutes were terrible. So cold, like you wanted to get out immediately. But then you start to notice your body really starts generating a lot of heat. So what's going on scientifically at that point where you kind of go from this painful cold feeling to almost like you have a little jacuzzi around you within the water?
Well, I don't know scientifically what's going on there. What my perception of it from having done this 1,000 times is you get in the cold water and there's that, it takes your breath away, especially when it's really cold, like right now in January, it's really cold. And usually I go under to begin with, just because, come on, don't wimp out, go under. So I go under, and then I sit the water right here. You want to get this area where the brown fat forms. You want to get your thyroid gland. And just so I don't forget, if you have low thyroid or you have really high thyroid, you might have problems with cold therapy. So if you have that, or if you have risk of heart disease, cold raises your blood pressure. Because remember, it's raising the fight or flight system. So the fight or flight system gets you ready to run or to fight. So your blood pressure goes up. For some people, your blood pressure goes up, it can trigger a heart attack. So if you have a lot of coronary artery disease, or theoretically you could, or you have a history of chest pain, definitely wouldn't do this until you get a thorough checkup from your doctor. And then things like autoimmune conditions, as I mentioned, adrenal fatigue, and any kind of serious, complex disease, I would be very, very careful with cold therapy, because it's a stress. And just like exercise is a stress, I'm a big fan of not over exercising if you have problems. I hear the coyotes are after me. So take it easy. And again, we'll explain a little bit at the end of how to do it gradually.
Yeah, and actually I think that is a good segue into some practical steps, especially if you haven't done any cold therapy before. So for me, just as something that I did starting out, just getting your face wet with cold water is a pretty good place to start. And then you can graduate to cold showers. I know that those can feel kind of brutal first thing in the morning, but as you get used to them, you actually find that they wake you up, and you feel pretty good after a cold shower. If you live by the ocean, like the Pacific Ocean where I am, the water's pretty cold. So if you just get out in that water, whether it's surfing or just swimming around. That's a really effective way. What else do you recommend, Dad, in terms of getting started with cold thermogenesis?
Yeah, getting started, I think the face dunks are very good because they stimulate what's called a dive reflex. So what you would do is get a big bowl and put ice in it and then put water, and then you dunk your face and hold your breath, and you just hold your breath as long as you can. If you're like me, when I started this, I could only hold my breath for a few seconds, and I found after just a few days I could hold my breath much longer. And after about a week, I got to where I loved doing the face dunks. I look forward to them. At first, they were quite painful. So once you get adapted to the face dunks, then I think another good way is to pack ice onto part of your body, say your abdomen or your chest. And that will be hard too at first, to just put say a 10-pound bag of ice across your chest or across your abdomen, and just gradually increase that exposure until it's not a problem. So you do the face dunks until they're not a problem, you're looking forward to it, and then you do the ice packs on your body, and you find that you can put an ice pack on your chest and keep it there for 30 minutes and it's no problem. Then your next step probably would be getting in the water. I recommend using a bathtub or something where you have a spotter. I wouldn't go in the Pacific Ocean your first time trying cold therapy, especially not by yourself without someone watching you, because of the risks that we talked about. There are risks. Get a medical clearance if you have medical problems, or maybe if you're old. The older you are, the more likely you have some kind of medical problem. So if you're old, you have medical problems, I get an okay from your physician. But you can use the bathtub, have a spotter, or you could use a pond as long as someone's there with you. As you get more familiar with it, you can go. I go to a creek that's near, as Howie mentioned, Sabino Creek. I go there because I like to be in nature. If you're near a waterfall, like we go to an area where there's a waterfall, and I've talked about before, when water crashes into rocks or into other water, negative ions are released. And so those negative ions are beneficial. They're kind of like the negative charge from the surface of the earth is beneficial and anti-inflammatory. So are these negative ions in the air created by what's called the Lennard effect in physics. You breathe in those negative ions. That's another big benefit of doing something in nature where there's flowing water. And you're grounded. So you're also getting the negative electron charge from the surface of the earth when you do it, although you could be getting that from an artificial source as well if it's grounded. So that's what I recommend. There's people out there that push it. You really don't have to start with really cold water. You can start with 80-degree water. That's 18 degrees below your body temperature, and then gradually go down. Or you could be more brave like I did and, start out with a 55-degree water. But you really don't have to go below 55 degrees at all to get the benefit. Now, the only benefit of going lower in temperature is you don't have to stay in the water as long. So if you go, well, I want to do 5 minutes instead of 10 minutes, then if you go in 45-degree water, that may be just as good as doing the longer term in the 55-degree water. So the advantage of the colder water is the saving of time to do a therapy. And any therapy is better than none. As I mentioned before, just turning down the thermostat in the house 5 degrees stimulates the system. Proven in a study, significant weight difference between the two groups, the groups that kept the temp the same and the groups that changed the temp. Now, how do we lose the weight? Well, when we make heat, we burn sugar and fat. So we know there's a receptor on our cell membranes called the GLUT4 receptor, and the GLUT4 receptor is upregulated with cold exposure. So this is a good thing for diabetics, because if you're diabetic, your blood sugar is too high. Well, that GLUT4 takes that sugar out of your blood, puts it in your cell where you can burn it for energy, and you can burn it to either make you shiver, or if you're in that brown fat with an uncoupled mitochondria, the uncoupling protein 1, you can make some heat directly, just like a fireplace. It's pretty amazing how we're built. And the details are not all known. You know, there's really a very limited amount of research done on this topic, believe it or not. You know, these studies are small, as I said, a lot of them are animal studies, and there's so much more it might do. But let me tell you, the big benefit that I get outside of health, and that is I'm pushing myself out of my comfort zone. I accomplish more in life, because sometimes when I don't want to make a phone call, or I don't want to, you know, do something that I really need to do, I'll think back to, compare this to getting in Sabino Creek. You know, you just do that. Why don't you just do this? Both of them take you out of your comfort zone. So it's a training to help you force your way past that barrier, our comfort zone. And when you pass that barrier, that's where the great things in life happen.
Exactly. And we'll touch on this topic later, but we've really this past year started getting more into our practice of meditation. So if you can incorporate meditation into your cold immersion, I mean, you really have a combination that's extremely powerful, where you're so far outside your comfort zone that it makes life seem relatively easy compared to where you are in that moment. And, you know, we want to push that, but we want to do it safely. Don't be too extreme about it. You know, it's not something where you need to go into 45-degree water tomorrow. You know, start with the baby steps, work your way up. My dad's been doing it for 10 years. I've been doing cryotherapy and cold immersion for about 6 years now. So, you know, you'll notice the difference though. I was just in Minnesota for Christmas. I wasn't wearing a jacket. I even wore shorts one day and people thought I was insane. But I was like, I literally don't get cold like I used to. So that's kind of a cool benefit too. You'll be more comfortable in cold environments. Is there anything else you want to add, Dad, before we sign off from this episode?
Yeah, well, cold therapy really does save on your wardrobe costs. You know, you don't need heavy coats. I went through a winter here in Arizona where I didn't put on a coat one time. I even went skiing on a cold day in a t-shirt, which I don't necessarily recommend, but I did. So I just wanted to mention a couple things about some of the science. So some of the science shows that cold exposure increases irisin, which is a molecule that is created with exercise. So cold therapy could be a replacement for your exercise. Now, I don't recommend it replacing all your exercises. Like, you know, you want to maybe do some agility and maybe some strength training in addition. But on the days I do cold therapy, I like mark on my calendar, I've done exercise for the day if I do cold therapy. So that can be another incentive, going, well, I don't have to do my run, or I don't have to go, you know, do my boot camp, or I don't have to go to my Peloton class, or whatever it is. If you go in cold water for 20 minutes, you're getting the irisin of an exercise session, which is beneficial. Helps your muscles recover, helps you burn fat, has a lot of beneficial effects. There's some other molecules they've discovered. One is called, let's see, I wrote it down here. It's kind of a hard one. It's 12-13-dihome. So they call this a lipokine. So lipid is fat, and then the cons like cytokines are inflammatory molecules. So this is a molecule that's released from the fat cell that helps us in several ways. So there's all kinds of things that they're discovering. They've done trials of applying cold therapy to patients with depression and found beneficial effects. So there's also information showing that it improves your mood. So it helps treat depression, about like an antidepressant. So this is another thing that maybe could be considered. The downside, again, is it is stress. So you got to be relatively healthy. You can't be on your deathbed and think that cold therapy is going to help you. Then a lot of us think that, well, if I get in the cold therapy, it'll stimulate my immune system. I won't get the flu. That isn't necessarily true. If you do too much cold exposure, or you're doing too many other things, or haven't been sleeping well, it could maybe make you more vulnerable to getting the flu. So your immune system is one of those things that, yes, it probably helps if you're healthy and you're staying healthy and you're staying good energy. But if you have low energy, then I wouldn't do it as a boost of your immune system, because there's evidence on both sides that it helps the immune system once you recover from that stress. So there's that recovery period, and that could be a window where you could actually get a cold. Remember, mom always saying, put on your coat or you will get a cold. She was right. That's possible.
So again, start implementing the baby steps. Do it now because it is winter still. Take advantage of the winter season, especially if you're not getting that sun exposure. The cold can augment a lot of that. If you're getting in the cold when it's cloudy, that can replace not being able to get in the sun. So start doing the cold. If you'd like this type of information, make sure you subscribe or like the fan page if you're on Facebook. If you're listening to this on a podcast, make sure you subscribe to that channel as well. If you want some more information, most of our stuff's free now. In 2020, that's our goal, to give away our best stuff for free. Go to our website, quantumpossibility.org. There's more free content on there, as well as links to all of our social media channels. If you're someone who wants like a personalized game plan of what to do, we have hundreds of these different protocols and biohacks that we could implement into your life. We do have some custom plans available, but no pressure to take us up on that offer if that's not interesting to you. So we appreciate you tuning in or listening, depending on where you are. Dad, anything else before we sign off?
No, I would highly encourage people to, at least do the baby steps of maybe going outside without a coat. Get uncomfortable. This is something that really will help you in the long term, even if it's just a little bit. It will help. If you look at your past and your history is, oh wow, I never let myself get cold. Like if I get cold, I turn on the heat, or I get in a hot shower, or whatever it is. Stay cold for 10 minutes. That could be all you need to do. Is once you get a feeling of a chill, keep it. Don't force it away unnaturally. When your ancestors, your great times 1,000 grandfather, when they were out there, there was no option but, hey, I've got to warm myself up. I don't have a fire. I don't have a coat. I don't have a house. I'm all wet because I fell in the creek, but they still survived. And that's why you're here, because your great whatever grandfather made it through.
All right, Dad, thanks for the time. We'll be on again tomorrow. We're going to try and do these every single day in 2020. So I'll try and hold us accountable to that. I'll see you tomorrow, and thanks for tuning in. Thanks, guys.